Today on Locked On Red Wings, the first domino falls as Albert Johansson signs a new one-year deal with Detroit and a draft profile on Jett Luchanko with Max Bultman of The Athletic.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a former broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And on today's episode, we welcome back Max Bultman. The second time this offseason we've had him on to do a draft profile. And today's a little bit of a dark horse candidate for the Red Wings, I feel, in Jett Luchanko. Max, thanks so much for coming back on. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah, I think like everybody kind of in countdown mode to the draft next Friday. I leave for Vegas a week from tomorrow, so definitely in that mode. But today we got a nice little flurry of NHL news, so that at least fed the beast a little bit.
Outside of the Red Wings, it was crazy. The Markstrom deal, the Devils, which has been reported upon since the deadline, but then out of nowhere, Pierre-Luc Dubois dealt to the Washington Capitals. Drew a blank there for a second, but the Washington Capitals, 1-for-1. Darcy Kemper, first blush. I feel like that's just a steal for the Kings getting out from underneath that contract and saving $3 million in the process and shoring up your goaltending, which was a huge question mark. Big win, in my opinion. But then just like a lot of flurry of other moves, too. The Sharks doing the Rangers a huge favor and picking up Barclay Goodrow for no reason, just bailing the Rangers out on that contract. So just so much going around the league. And the Red Wings, not one to be one-upped, finally signed the first domino in their long list of RFAs. I think they have 5 RFAs this season. Albert Johansson was the first one to get signed. And before I can ask you about that, Max, I got to let the people know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And also want to thank you for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so, Max, Albert Johansson, everyone knows at this point, we've said it a lot on this podcast. I'm sure in many of your articles you've mentioned that he and Jonathan Berggren, and even Yzerman mentioned it himself in person, that they're no longer waiver eligible going into this season. To go down to the AHL Grand Rapids Griffins after training camp, they'd have to pass through waivers, and Yzerman admitted himself they probably would not pass through waivers. So with this new one-year deal, two-way contract, which all two-way contract means, and if I'm correct, is that he gets paid a smaller salary in the minors. Is this just a bridge, prove-it deal for Albert Johansson, who's kind of like on the fringe of being in the NHL?
Yeah, exactly. It's a player that, I think that the Red Wings like, and like you said, I think we expect him to be in the NHL this season, but you're not going to give a 2-year deal to a guy who's played 0 NHL games. You're going to kind of go the 1-year route and see what happens and go from there. I don't know that the details on this one are out yet, although I do see Cap Friendly has an unconfirmed tentative $775,000 cap hit, but it's going to be right around there, right? It's going to be right around the league minimum for Johansson. But I think the key with Johansson is really just what does he do this season? And it's not a 100% guarantee that he's on the NHL roster. They're going to make him earn it, but the strong indication is that he will be a Red Wing this year, and we'll see what that adds up to. Does he play 60 games? Does he play more games? Does he kind of rotate in and out as a seventh defenseman? We're going to kind of see all of that once the season starts up.
Well, that's kind of the biggest thing, like you said. I mean, the two-way part of that makes it really interesting for, everyone's initial question is he going to make the roster on opening night? And then to your point, that's a big toss-up. They're going to make him earn it no matter what. And so then you start thinking throughout the course of the rest of the season and what I guess it would take to do so. Now, obviously, free agency is going to, I think, clear up kind of a lot of that just in terms of, what the Wings do and whatnot. But from where you're sitting, I mean, I don't know, like early returns. This contract in a vacuum, I don't think means anything to like his odds of making the roster on opening night. This had to happen because of the waiver exemption kind of going away anyway. But I think just talking in terms of his play, a lot of people were impressed in waves in the AHL this year. Like, what is your kind of pulse on the situation for I don't know how often or early we see him this fall.
Yeah, I think to me, I like Johansson as a player, and he's kind of a guy when you hear coaches talk about him, they'll say like, he grows on you. You have to really watch him a lot to understand his impact. It reminds me a little bit of like an Oli Mata in the way we would talk about him. Just kind of that steady, stable guy. He's not a huge frame. He's not a hyper offensive type, but he can kind of do a little bit of everything. And I think in some ways that's a good thing. In some ways it'll be a little bit of an obstacle for him, especially you look at NHL defensemen. I think one thing I always look for is what's their special teams role. That's a way that you can really kind of carve out time for yourself as a player. Are you someone who can play on the power play? Are you someone who's going to be a go-to penalty killer? I don't see either of those as like a slam dunk for Johansson with where the Red Wings roster stands now, and that's going to be an obstacle he faces. But over time, could he work in? Like that's been similar for Mata, frankly, is he's maybe not going to be the first guy over the boards on the PK, but he's a smart enough player, a steady enough player that you see him get, time there sometimes. And so I kind of see that as his obstacle is like, what's your special teams? What's your go-to role? Besides, obviously, I think at even strength, if he's in the lineup, he's probably a third pair guy. One thing he does have going for him is he's played on the right side. He can do that a little bit. It's not the ideal situation, I don't think, for any left shot D really to play on the right side, but it's something that I think he's done a little bit this year in Grand Rapids, and maybe is one pathway for him to a little more playing time in Detroit potentially.
Yeah, I think the big hurdle here is like less about Albert Johansson, but the D-core as a whole, right? Because we're under the assumption that Simon Edmonds is a slam dunk to make the roster. Like he proved that with 16 games, I believe it was, with the Detroit Red Wings at the end of the season. Albert Johansson not having waiver eligibility, that leaves you with literally 9 defensemen under contract that are slated to make the Red Wings roster. Somebody's got to go, right? Like it's not unusual for an NHL team to carry 8 defensemen, but those teams normally don't also carry 3 goalies, which the Red Wings did this year, in which the Red Wings only carried 7 defensemen because of that. So you're looking at a situation where 1 to 2 defensemen probably is going to, I would think, again, this is my opinion and my speculation, would probably get moved here. But like Max, in your opinion, who is, if anyone is going to get moved, who do you think it's most likely going to be? Because in my mind, it's either Justin Holl, who has a 10-team no trade clause, I think it is, Oli Mata, who has no trade protection, or maybe even Albert Johansson himself as just like a player that is kind of bait in a trade, maybe an NHL caliber defenseman you maybe trade away to bring somebody better in return.
Yeah, I think you said it right there. I mean, those would be the 3 names that I would have given you. Now, I don't think they have to do it. I think they could carry 8. I don't think they're opposed to it. I've seen them do it before. And even though it's a little bit of a, different proposition, if you do carry 3 goalies, which we don't know yet if that's what they're going to do, you can do it. You could carry 12 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goalies, and that would be perfectly fine. So they don't have to make any move, but they could, and those would be the candidates that you just listed off for those reasons. I think, Hall didn't play in over half the games last year and was a scratch. And I think for me and a lot of others, that makes him the likeliest odd man out. But it's 2 more years on that contract at $3.4 million. That's not easy to get somebody to necessarily take. If you want to buy it out, you're stretching that over 4 years. I don't think that's necessarily something that's a given that they're going to do. They may try to go another year for this. I mean, people weren't thrilled with where things stood with the Ben Sherratt contract a year ago, and I think he had a stronger year that reassured a lot of people. So I'm very curious to see what will happen there. The buyout window opens, I think, 24 hours after the Stanley Cup final concludes, which keeps getting delayed by 3 days because the NHL built in a pretty long schedule for the Cup. So we'll see what happens at that moment when that opens. But those would be the 3 names.
NHL front offices just decided that offseason began today because all those moves just happened. Scott, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, really, my last one is not really a ton about Johansson. It's just when is the draft's next Friday? Yeah,
28th.
Next contract given out by the Wings, before or after the draft?
I think before. I think ideally you're going to get at least one, if not both, of Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond before the draft, because it's really hard to do the rest of your offseason business if you don't know how much money you have tied up in those 2. Now, you could provisionally just set aside and be safe and set aside like 17 or even 17.5 million and be like, well, we're definitely not going over this with these 2 guys. So assume our budget is whatever, 12 million. They have about 29 million right now, but you expect a big chunk of that's getting eaten up by those 2 deals. but you'd like to be precise, right? You'd like to know what exactly you have in place. And even frankly, if you end up bridging with either one of these two, then I think you really want to know that, because you want to be in on guys who could go quickly on July 1. So ideally, you get both of these two done before the draft. I would imagine the Red Wings feel similarly, because it is quite the handcuff to not know for sure, but they could, just kind of budget out what they think it will cost and go that way. But I certainly think you want to get both of those done prior to the draft, and I would think that they'll try to do that.
Awesome. Max, hang tight with us. We're going to go to a quick break, and when we return, we're going to start talking about Jett Luchanko, the center out of the Guelph Storm. So stay tuned for that on segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Hey, Locked On Red Wings fans, I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners, the mobile game Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you could run the Red Wings better than Steve Yzerman himself? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is most definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead your team to glory. Hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Red Wings fan, you know there is no offseason. GMs are constantly making moves. Wednesday really proved that. And at any point of the year to improve their team's chances. And that's what I think you are going to love about this game. Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and available offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. By the way, Locked On Red Wings listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store. So make sure you check it out. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Max Bultman, Detroit Red Wings beat writer for The Athletic, and we're going to transition now to talking about Jett Luchanko. He is a 5'11" center, 183 pounds, right shooting center out of the Guelph Storm of the OHL. He had 74 total points in 68 games this season and was a point per game at the U18 World Junior Championship with Team Canada. And Max, I was texting you, late last week, just trying to put some feelers out there about any guys you might want to come on and talk about that you think would be a fit for the Red Wings closing in on the draft. And a lot of the guys that you were the highest on, we had already discussed. And you dropped this name. He's like, this is the only guy I could see out of the people you've already talked about that might be on the Red Wings radar. Looking at his elite prospects page, and they kind of aggregate all of the different rankings, right? A lot of different teams, a lot of different rankings rather, have him in the late teens at the highest, mostly in the 20s and 30s. Yet this is somebody that you kind of pointed out. What is it about Jett Luchanko that you feel is, I guess, a dark horse candidate for the Red Wings at 15?
Yeah, and there are other guys I could see, but I think Luchanko is kind of the most compelling. It's a good profile here, and I do think, especially when you look at his age as one of the youngest players in this class, he's a late August birthday. He's like 3 weeks from being eligible for next year's draft. That is especially interesting when you look at some of the production stuff in his game. But the bones of his game is great competitor, great skater, not a huge body, but he does have some really good kind of playmaking. If you just go and you can find on YouTube, you can find, his points from this season. You're going to see a lot of really nice plays he made. Specifically, he finds the back door really consistently. And then you go watch some of the shift by shift, videos of his game, and you just see a really hard competitor. There's a reason that he played like 23 minutes for Canada in that U18 gold medal game. He is a trusted player. He goes all out. He's a smart player, and he's a great skater. So right there, you have a really strong foundation. I think kind of a fit for what the Red Wings have done. But the question I think people will have on him is he, super skilled? Is he going to be a super high scorer, or is he going to end up being more of a middle six type, right? And I think that's a common theme when we're talking about Red Wings, draft candidates here, as people want to see a little bit more of a swing this year. But I do think Luchanko's playmaking would be a really nice element to add. And does give him like a credible shot to play in a top 6 someday, in addition to being, I think, a fairly high floor player because of the motor and the skating, even if you maybe ideally want a little more size.
Well, I mean, one of the things that really jumps out about him is just the fact that his mocked draft position is all over the place. There's people that have him as high as like 16, 17, 18, and then as low as like into the mid 40s, right? And just being like a mid second round pick. So, but throughout the season, and like Guelph had a good year, but like throughout the season, he kind of found himself rising up, especially as the year kind of got closer to the end. What do you think is the biggest, I guess, attributor to both of those things? Maybe if you can speak on them, right? Like why was there the late push? Is it just production? He got better as the year went along. And then why is there such a varying opinion, I guess, on his draft status?
I couldn't tell you about kind of why the rise. I would probably have to be a lot more plugged into the OHL specifically for that. But I would go back to kind of the birth year and or the birth month there and say, like, especially for one of the younger players in this class, I think that's what you would hope to see, right? If you have a guy who's on the younger side, is you'd hope to see a guy who's toward the back half of the year really pushing, really making a big impact, especially as he continues to grow. You know how fast, in your 16, 17, you can add in weight and in height and probably in comfort level to this league, that it's only his second year in the league. So that would be my answer to that. And as for why he's kind of over in people's rankings, I guess I couldn't say. I don't, make those rankings.
Yeah.
But I do think he will be a first round pick. I feel pretty strongly that he's a first round pick, and I think he's going to go pretty high. Not like top 10, but I think pretty solidly in the first round. And that's why I think he made sense to talk about here is that, Corey has mocked him. I think Corey's most recent mock draft that came out, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but he had him mocked at 17 to Washington. And he wrote in that as it stands, there's a better than 50% chance he's going to go in the top 20. So I think this is definitely the right range to be talking about him in. Maybe part of it is, like I said, kind of those numbers don't like scream off the page. They are good. It's above a point per game in the OHL for a draft eligible player and a young draft eligible player at that. But I guess that's probably what I would point to if I had to guess why that there's kind of variance in the rankings.
A lot of the players that we've talked about this offseason, as we get closer to the draft, there seems to be a emphasis by us, because of our history watching what Steve Yzerman's drafting has done, is on guys who maybe project as like two-way, responsible in the defensive zone type players. And one of the things that jumps out to me when reading about Luchanko is people talk about how fast he is. How much of, what, and you watch some game tape too, heading into this interview, like how much did his speed jump out to you as like one of the biggest positives that he has?
It's an asset for sure. And I think especially when you couple it with kind of the motor and that competitiveness, like being a fast player who goes at 100% a lot of the time, absolutely that pops off the ice. I think Corey's even talked about him in maybe having some rhyme to Oliver Moore, who was a guy that I know a lot of Red Wings fans were excited about. Similar deal, 5'11" guy, great skater, great compete. I kind of liked Oliver Moore's shot a lot, but I think Luchanko would be a better playmaker than what you would see from Oliver Moore. I mean, again, I think if I were a Red Wings fan who was interested in Jett Luchanko, just go watch his highlight reel from this past season. There's a YouTube video out there that has like every point, and just count the number of times he's finding the slot, finding the back door. It's like over and over again, running the flank on the power play. He just finds that back door, finds that back door, finds that back door. And it's a highlight reel. I usually do not encourage people to watch highlight reels because they only tell so much of the story.
I tell the positives.
Yes, exactly. But I do think this is a pretty smart, complete player as well. And I think watching his shift by shifts would more show you that. But, especially when you want to see what is the offense level, that is a place that you can go and just really distill down to like, okay, what does this guy do to create offense? And with Luchanko, what I've seen in what I've watched is he's really good at finding that seam pass to open guys on the back door.
Awesome. Scotty, I'm going to head to a quick break, and when we return, we'll get right to that question that you were just about to ask. I could see it. Segment 3 of Lockdown Red Wings coming up. Got to talk to you guys today about Game Time. They are an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, and last-minute deals save you up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. So if you want to, go to Comerica Park and watch the Tigers score maybe one run a game, check out Game Time. They're exactly who you want to go to. Their lowest price guarantee will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same tickets somewhere else for less. And the Game Time ticket coverage means that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And there's a nice little feature that includes the total up front that you can just toggle in the settings so you get no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty slacking on his duties here as the Game Time banner is still up.
Sorry.
You're good, buddy.
I had my other tab still open, so it just completely cut it off. I couldn't even see it.
We're joined by Max Bultman of The Athletic, and before we went to break, Scotty, it looked like you were about to ask a question regarding Luchanko.
Yeah, well, first off, I kind of, and Brian alluded to it earlier as well, but this is someone that you specifically kind of sought out to want to talk about. So I want to know what excites you the most specifically about his game and in your head specifically, rather. But also, like on draft night, is there I don't even know how to word this, I guess, really well, but like, is there a specific way that the board would need to fall for this to be more justifiable? I don't know. Justifiable is probably a negative connotation of a word to use there, but like, is there a certain way where, like if a lot of forwards are going earlier than expected, then maybe he's more in the realm of possibility for the Wings or vice versa? Like, is there something that would, I don't know, need to happen to incentivize the Wings to take a little bit more of a quote unquote risk for somebody that maybe isn't supposed to be in that range? Or do you just think it's, best player is best player in their eyes?
Yeah, I think, the public can get a little attached to the lists that the public sees, right? The ones that like Scott and Corey and elite prospects and all that come out. Team lists are not necessarily going to be aligned with that. And a team can't, the team does all this work throughout the year. They scout all these guys. And at the end of the day, if they have a guy higher on their list, I don't think anyone should want them to deviate from that just because, 3 or 4 of the public scouts, as good as I think some of the public scouts are, might see it differently. The team did their work and the team's got to trust their work, right? So if the Red Wings have him highest then at 15, then they could do it. And I don't think it would be, I think he's in that mix. I think he was on the initial list of targets that I published for them whatever the lottery was, and they found out they had the 15th. I put out a list of targets and he was on it. One guy who wasn't on it was Michael Hage. It should have been. But other than that, I think that's still a pretty reasonable group. Stian Solberg, I guess, would be another, the Norwegian defenseman who's, I think, now kind of in that range. But I do think, the more forwards that go earlier, I think the better the case is for making Luchanko your pick, right? Like, I think if you want the speed and the playmaking specifically, that's kind of what differentiates him from like a Michael Brandsegg-Nygaard, who has more size and I think a much better shot, I would say. But he doesn't have, that same kind of propensity to play make. And I don't think he's quite as fast, although I do think he's a good skater. So that would be like one, case that you would make over him. A guy like Hage, you might say, okay, well, like we feel like Luchanko's really dog on bone kind of thing. And, Hage has more skill. So I think a lot of Red Wings fans would probably prefer Hage. And I think that's probably how I'd rank it right now too. But, I think you can make that case. It's just kind of different priorities. So I don't think there's any specific scenario that needs to happen. I think, obviously if you trade back 2 or 3 spots and you feel like you can get Luchanko, that'd be great too. But there's a chance that you would trade back and then he would go before he got to you. Because I really think that is kind of the range that we're talking about here with him. So I don't think they need to do that. I don't think there's a specific way this needs to go for this to be a justifiable pick. I wouldn't call it a reach. He's just a name that's in the mix that maybe we haven't talked about quite as much. And I think kind of sleeper pick is the way you have it on the show rundown. I think that's a decent way to put it. It's not my guess. My guess for the mix kind of right now would be more like Brandsegg-Nygaard, Hage, and Consta Helenius would be kind of the first 3 names that I would zero in on. but this would be another one on the periphery along with like an Igor Chernyshov.
Well, and that's great to hear. My last question that I have regarding him is we talked a lot about what kind of game he brings to the table. We haven't talked a lot about the gaps in his game yet. And I mean, obviously he's super young, so at 5'11", he could definitely still grow. I'm not worried about his size by any stretch of the imagination, but when it comes to his play on the ice, what do you think he still needs to improve before? And there's a lot of time. I'm not going to like panic about what gaps are in his game, but just curious where you see his gaps are right now.
I think size is in that conversation, right? Especially for a guy that you're talking about potentially playing in a middle six. I think you wouldn't mind having a little more size. Like I could see a world where the Red Wings had a third line one day that was like Luchanko, Kasper, and Mazur, and it being one of the best third lines in the NHL. The only hang up I would have in saying that is that it would be generally on the smaller side, right? Like 5'11", 6'0", 6'1" is how that would go. Not in order, but like it's on an average size of 6'0" there, and that's not towering for what could be a matchup line. I think that would have a lot of offense for a third line, though, and I think it could be a weapon. I could also see Luchanko playing on a second line, but then you're talking about, still, I think you want a little more size to what the Red Wings already have with a Raymond and with a DeBrincat and all that. So size, I think, is in that conversation, especially for a guy who you look at the speed and the compete and you think, forechecking and retrievals are going to be a big part of his game, going back defensively, all that play in center. You do want size in those players. I don't know when that became taboo to say that we want big players. If all else is equal, you want big players. You just do, right? So that matters. And then I think you point to the finishing, right? Like I think when we talk about his production, I think the assist numbers are quite strong. It's like 54 in 68 games. It's the goals that are more like 20. And so I think you want to see him score more goals to bump that overall number up. But that being said, I think the Red Wings could kind of use a pure playmaker too. So I'm almost even talking myself into this being a little more realistic the longer we go here. But those are the things I would point to. I think he's a little undersized for what the role projection would be, and maybe you want a little bit more natural goal scoring.
It's funny is we talked to Prashanth back on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Red Wings here, and that was one of the things we talked about is like, the last few years the Red Wings have really targeted two-way forwards that are defensively responsible with their first picks in the first round. Obviously, like Axel Sandin-Pellikka is an offensive first defenseman, but that was a luxury kind of pick. Now with someone like now their cabinet is full of these guys who project to be NHL caliber defensemen that are projecting to be two-way players. The question is will they continue that trend, or with the cabinet as full as they will they go with somebody who's high-end talent, high-end skill to really round that out, really take a home run swing at a guy who could, if his ceiling is as high as they think, just really like burst onto the scene. Like, that we talked to Cole Eiserman with Prashanth. That's what, the whole conversation was, because we talk about ceilings. Cole Eiserman, if he can like figure it out at the NHL level, could be such a potent goal scorer. So it's really going to be interesting to see what direction Steve Yzerman chooses, because, and I think we mentioned this last time we had you on, Max, the Red Wings are in a position where they could really do whatever the heck they want, because at 15 overall and the cabinet the way it is, things look pretty good, optimistic for the Red Wings going forward.
You would say the cabinet is full of defensively responsible players? That's a narrative I hear daily, like 10 times a day from fans. And I'm always wondering, like, what am I missing here? Because I count three. I count Mazur, Kasper, and Danielson as like likely NHLers who are 200-foot players. I don't think that's a 12-man lineup here, guys. Like, I think there's a lot of players here that are still unaccounted for. And I don't think you just want 3 or 4 players you trust defensively in your lineup. And I get that, especially when you talk about like a top 9, you got to have skill there. But I also I kind of reject the premise that it's either or for skill or complete, right? I don't think the Red Wings drafted Danielson and Kasper thinking they don't have skill. I think Danielson, in fact, has quite a good bit of skill to his game. And I think that it's somehow, again, like with the size thing, it's somehow gotten to be a negative connotation when we talk about the Red Wings, that these guys are 200-foot players, that means they don't have other stuff. It just means there's a good foundation to the defensive side of the game, which does matter. It actually doesn't matter any less than the offensive side of the game. I think they could use more skill. I think that's a glaring need in their system. So I don't want to, double talk here, or I don't want to make people think they're going crazy. Like, they do need that. But I do kind of bristle sometimes at the idea that a guy like Brandt Nygaard, who is very responsible, is very complete, is like a safe pick and doesn't have offense, when I think he has one of the better shots of players I've watched in this draft. Like, that's a goal scorer to me too, just because he'll also go get pucks for his teammates. I don't view that as a drawback. I view that as an even bigger selling point, right? So I don't want to, that's my own personal a war that I wage, I guess. So I don't want to drag you guys into it. But
you know what's funny though, and I think you bring up a fair point, because it's so easy, and like we as hockey fans and just humans in general, we want so badly to categorize things in black and white. And so I think that that's a fallacy that myself included falls into. Like when I look at MBN, you mentioned him, right? You know, you mentioned he has a really good shot, but of course my mind really goes towards like a lot of the things that people talk about with his hard forechecking and being responsible. So I then categorize him in that type of category, where like you bring up a really good point. He has a multifaceted game. And so while people may focus on that one thing, again, myself included in this situation, a lot of players bring a lot of different things to the table, and it's not just super black and white. So yeah.
No, I agree. And it is a good point to raise, right? Like I talked about it in my mailbag today. It's definitely like one of the big topics. So I was not trying to be too testy there, but it's just, it's something that like, sometimes I got to check myself. I'm like, am I crazy here that there's all these like really solid, like definitely going to play, two-way guys in the system? Or is it just kind of the three big guys that we're pretty sure are going to be there someday? But then there's still plenty of question marks, and there's even more question marks on the scoring side. I get that there's not kind of a Michael Hage in the system right now, and I think for that reason he very much belongs in the discussion for this pick. You could even say a Cole Eiserman, although he is a player who I would rather have Hage than Eiserman, because I think there's just more ways to seeing it go his way. I think you're putting so much on Eiserman's shot there that it just, to me, and I know that sometimes you got to take the swing and take a risk here, but I think people would be even more mad, would they not, if they just repeated the Zadina thing over and over, just hoping like, oh, one of these times it's going to work. And it might, but if you miss on like 3 first-round picks in 5 years because you keep trying to chase a superstar, then I think people are going to be pretty upset with that too.
Sounds
so I
familiar,
think, there's a lot of ways to try and go about building a team. And I get that you have to take risks to do it. I think that they should take risks to do it. But what I wrote in my mailbag today is it's about the overall evaluation, right? You're going to be wrong about projections on guys. You're going to be wrong in your evaluation in some way or another, most likely. You might be wrong because they're better than you thought, and you might be wrong because they're not as good as you thought. But if your evaluation says that this player who is more one-dimensional is going to bring so much offense that it outweighs the defense, absolutely take him. Like I'd take Artemi Panarin on my team any day of the week, right? Mm-hmm. But to be Artemi Panarin is a high bar, and it's a big fall off to being. And I don't want to shit on this player in particular, like necessarily, but he's just the first guy coming to my mind. Jeff Skinner, right? Like if you use the, top 10 pick on Jeff Skinner, and we're talking about the 15th pick, so maybe it's even a little more muted than that, people would not be thrilled about that, especially, Buffalo gave him this big contract and I don't think are that thrilled about it. Right. So it's because his offense is not consistently at that like Panarin game breaking level. Are you selling out for 25 to 30 goals, or are you selling out for 40 goals? And I'm not saying what could happen. I'm saying, what do you project is going to happen? You think this guy's a 40 goal scorer, a 70-point player, or are you hoping, well, what if he could be? I'm not taking a 10% chance that some guy's going to be that. I think there's way more efficient ways to use draft picks than that. But if you think there's like a 40, 50% chance he's that, then say, okay, I don't care that he doesn't play defense. That's fine. I'm fine with that logic. But don't do it on like a prayer.
Beautiful. No, like that's
I'm smiling right now because we clearly touched on something.
Legitimately, and I don't want to go on. I know we have to like wrap the show up. I don't want to go on a 5-minute conversation about baseball at the end of a hockey show, but like this is literally Torkelson. Like, right? Like he's a bad defensive first baseman. And on draft night, it was like, oh, if he produces at a whatever 900, 1,000 OPS level, then it's worth it. If he does anything short of that, it's not. And like that is exactly the conversation that you're talking about here in like a hockey sense, right? Like for it to justify the means offensively, it's okay. He better be producing, dang near a point per game, and like if he does that, great. You're checking all the boxes. You got what you wanted, but you want to try to take, unless you believe that is guaranteed going to happen, take players who can affect the game in so many different areas than just one. And if they are only one, they better be some of the best in the freaking NHL at that one way they they affect the game. And I think that's such a brilliant point, which is why I don't mind that we're 5 minutes over and you went on that, because that was I agree with everything you said there.
It was a
play a lot of
fantastic tangent. I love it.
Yeah, I it's a little bit of a pet. I don't know. It's not pet peeve. It's just like a constant kind of like bouncing ball in my brain that's always going.
We get it here. We not specifically that one, but we get those types of things here all the time.
I play a lot of fantasy football, right? And there's guys every year that you really want. You really talk yourself into like, this guy's going to be a stud. And at some point you have to check yourself, because you find yourself going like, I'm now drafting him in an area where if he's not a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL this season, what have I done? I just used the 12th overall pick on him or whatever, right? Like, you might not have gotten him at the, whatever the equivalent of that is. I guess it'd be like the 27th or 28th pick or something if you waited until your next pick. Yeah. But you have to be content sometimes with that, of just like, if I use this pick on him, he has to be this, right? Or else I've burned the pick. And I think there's an argument for that on kind of like quote unquote higher floor, safer, whatever players too, of like, I can sometimes talk myself into a guy. I'll be like, yeah, well, I really like, how he projects, and he's safe middle 6 projection.
You can be both
with a chance to be more. You can have a high
floor and a high ceiling though.
Exactly. Right. Right. So look at Zach Hyman, right? Zach Hyman 2 years ago, you would have talked about as the definition of a high floor safe player. Does someone want to check how many goals he scored this year? Because I'm pretty sure it was a lot. And I know he's with McDavid and that matters and all that stuff, but like, he did it. That happened. And so I think you want that. You want to have players that are complementary and can finish chances from your stars, from your big time playmakers, who will also do their part to do the dirty work to get the puck for your team. It all feeds itself. And so, yes, go for skill, go for offense. They need more of it, no doubt. But I would say don't write off players who have this complementary profile too, and have offense just because they do more. I think it's a selling point, not a drawback.
Yeah. And I mean, the nice thing about prospects is they could be anything, even a boat. So, I mean, like the callback to yesterday's episode, anyone who was listening, it's one of those situations where like a prospect, the guy you get on draft night is not the player that you're going to get the NHL. Like, they're going to develop, and you don't know what aspects of their game too are going to flourish along that process. So yeah, like Max,
people like to point to kind of like, okay, these guys slipped because they were small. And those are really good examples usually, like an Alex DeBrincat, a Johnny Gaudreau, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov, although I think there was some Russia to that one as well. But there's also great players who slipped because they maybe didn't have as much obvious offense, right? Like I'm stretching a little bit here back because this is before I was really on the NHL beat, but I look at like a Rope Hintz and what a great center he is. And he went in the second round too. And I don't think it was because he's small, because he's not small. He's 6'3" and he skates really well, right? So what did people miss with Rope Hintz? I don't think on Rope Hintz's draft day, people were saying like, this guy is going to be a number 1 center, right? They probably would have never given you that projection on him, perhaps outside of Dallas, who obviously drafted him. But I don't think the fans were kind of like clamoring as like, this is your your future 1C kind of potential. But upside comes in different shapes and sizes. And that would be kind of one of my messages, I guess, to people listening.
Awesome. Max, thank you so much for taking the time again to come on here and speak with us. And as usual, I'm going to ask you to tell the people where they can find you and your stuff.
Yeah, I'm at theathletic.com. I'm on Twitter at @M_Bultman, and would love to have anybody on board that wants to read about the Red Wings with us.
Yes, absolutely. Scotty, you have any final thoughts, buddy?
I don't think so, man. I appreciate you as always for that was a nice dialogue there at the end. That was my favorite part of the show. So I appreciate you as always, man. We ball.
That's my pleasure.
We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, probably doing a free agent hypothetical. I haven't decided exactly which play we're going to do, but it'll be probably either Brett Pesce or Tyler Bertuzzi for you Red Wings fans who still love good old Tyler Burt. So we'll be back with a new episode tomorrow talking about one of those two. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.